50 likes. Chad, let me know when you're ready, and don't be afraid to get y'all super chat questions in too, so we can get the debate started off right. But Chad, are you ready to do your opening?
All right. Yeah, I bet. All right, let's go.
You got 8 minutes.
All right. 8 minutes is a lot, to say the obvious. Maybe perhaps a little too much, to be frank. It seems somewhat obvious at the slightest to those who have a conscience that that which is in front of you didn't come about by happenstance and random chance. There's a part of you that understands that, but there's another dichotomy each human has that tries to question that and understand its origin. And that's where a lot of you find yourself, is in the questioning of this rationale around God and whether God is even a thing. But I think it's a rather obvious case that God is rationally the case, because when you think and perceive the world, it comes to you in a way which seems not only grounded in an equilibrium, but somewhat of a perfection underneath of the governing forces that present reality. I think not only in that, but in the fact that if you are to ground yourself in logic and reason and claim to be a rational individual who pushes rationale above all things, then one of the most rational things humans have ever done is the scientific method and the pursuit of empirical sciences. And the empirical sciences not only function, but are only understood through what is called the principle of sufficient reason. That actions, whether they're physical or whether you have a broader scope on things that are not just of the material world, everything has a reason, some sufficient reason. And that is the pursuit and the understanding of the world through a rational lens. So the only rational position to hold is that there is a necessary origin from which everything stems. And when you unpack the first core tenet of God's ontology, it is exactly that. It is the source, the pure act that brought about everything you see in front of you. Now you may ask, what are its properties, or how can I know it? Prove it to me. These are the questions people wrestle with, but it's an inescapable truth that there is such an entity. What can be known about it is a different conversation, but insofar as is its existence real and necessary, absolutely. And it is the only rational position to hold. For without it, you really have nothing. Your world can be grounded in nothing. Your opinions are grounded in nothing. They are merely constituencies of some ideas in your head that do not comport to the world around you. And that's just silly. And frankly, in the layman's lexicon, that is what we call someone who is irrational. That which you cannot ground in rationale, in some ontology. And if you cannot do that, you are irrational. So that's it.
All right. Thank you for the amazing introduction or opening statement. Amy, let me know when you're ready and I'll start your 8 minutes.
All right.
Cool. You've got 8 minutes.
Is it rational to believe in God? No. In fact, I would argue believing in God is irrational. However, we all as rational human beings have irrational beliefs. So let's go into why I believe specifically that believing in God is not rational. What do I even mean by God? Well, that depends on which theist you ask, since each theist has their own definition. However, there are a few that are popular. For thousands of years, gods were people who threw life. We're just making it more so. Why does something need to die? And why do we need to pay for crimes from long before we were born? And that's just one religion. Jews are talking to burning bushes. Muslims are having conversations with talking ants. And hey, who says an almighty being can't have talking burning bushes or ants like a Pixar movie? Well, I guess that's true. If God can do anything, then by definition, God can do anything. Which brings us to what I call the modern version of God. Omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, or all-powerful, all-knowing, and present everywhere at the same time. In fact, some of these modern theists will assert it's the only definition that fits a god. Every other deity, all the ones from the past, all the current ones in Eastern religions, they don't match the definition of God because, well, their God has a bigger omni than your God. 3 to be exact, even though every time we put this God's powers to the test, they are nowhere to be seen. We can't test them with the best tool that humanity has ever known, science. God never seems able to work their way through the peer review process. For someone who is all-powerful, can't seem to say hi, or come down to have a conversation, or lift a spoon, let alone some amazingly strong feat. For someone who is all-knowing, they sure seem to get a lot wrong in their holy texts. Turns out if you read the Bible, a bat is not a bird. I'm also not sure why they didn't seem to know why slavery was wrong. Objective theistic morality. And he didn't know not to take slaves from the nations around you? Or really anything useful, like science does every single day. And present everywhere at the same time, except anywhere that humans can see him. Are we playing the world's longest game of hide and go seek? It's odd that a being this powerful, knowing, and everywhere at once can't seem to spare a moment to tell us they exist. But theists often say, well, hey, who are you? This is God after all, and you're some schmuck. Well, sure, but I point you back to the 3 omnis. What's the problem? Does he not have enough time? Is he not strong enough and takes naps? Doesn't know where to fit me into their schedule? Excuses. When the going gets logistical, religion gets mystical. They don't have answers for these types of questions. Suddenly, I don't know, which is often not a good answer to them, becomes the most clear. Though there is a reason these modern theists, normally Christian and Muslim fundamentalists, want to stick with such deistic arguments. Asking about a necessary being, a first cause, or a contingent deity? A fancy way of saying their God doesn't depend on anything. Meanwhile, they're not able to present any empirical evidence for this being. Not that they have any for their specific religion. After all, would you want to defend a talking serpent? How about a man coming back from the dead, or cutting the moon in half? Of course not, because the miracle claims in all of their holy texts are silly, irrational, and every other religion sees this about the others. Jews think Christians are silly, Christians think Muslims are silly, Muslims think Mormons are silly. Atheists agree. But the apologists and Dawahists don't want to defend Noah's Ark because it's irrational. Do you want to defend a massive boat holding 2 of every animal? That's a lot of poopa scooping for a single family. No, but they do want to talk to skeptics about why God is the necessary being in which everything else is contingent. Since there is no evidence of that either, but it doesn't have lions and antelopes side by side. Since science can tell you where lions and antelopes separated, we're both mammals, starting with something that looks similar to a mouse. That's why we all have hair and nurse newborns with milk. Yet lions are the same order as cats and bears, also meat eaters. Antelopes are the same order as cows, which both eat grass. Evolution, while not anti-theistic, gives a viable explanation to how animals, along with all life, is related. And when we ask for the same logistics in return, we are often left-handed by theists. God spoke things into existence, which is not something that sounds, well, rational. It sure doesn't explain anything to us. Okay, how does this process work? When theists ask us physics questions, how did the planet form? Not only can we explain how planets form through supernova explosions, we can go back 13.8 billion years to the Big Bang because of the cosmic microwave background radiation. I see I have 7 seconds. I'm going to cut to the end. So is it rational to believe in God? No. Although many great thinkers have believed in a God, many great minds also thought the earth was the center of the universe or believed in alchemy. Rational people believe in irrational things for rational reasons all the time. And until I see some good, hard empirical evidence for any of these deities, I have no reason to think any of them exist. Thank you.
Thank you for the great openings, both of y'all. I'm going to unmute. I have an hour for this open discussion portion. Do y'all have any questions about the open discussion portion before we get into this? Or are you ready to rock and roll here?
Looking forward to the conversation.
All right. Mega bloodbath engage. You've got an hour. And let's get those super chats in, people. Let's get some questions in.
Well, I guess in the canon of conversation, I had to respond to what you said. I find that in your account of denial, it's a flip-flop between religion and God, where in which you take the lens of religion when it favors you and take the lens of what you would call, or you were calling, some uncaused cause, some necessary being. And at the root of even the religious investigation into this property, you'll come to find out that there is but one ubiquitously held property, which is exactly that. So I try to give people this analogy. If you take the Abrahamic school of thought, which I am a part of, and for that reason, speak within this lens, and you put all of these people, the Jews, Christians, Muslims, in an amphitheater, they would be at each other's throats about the clothes they wear, the food they eat, the kind of holidays they practice. However, if you found yourself in the center of this amphitheater with a megaphone, and you asked a simple question, where does God come from? For that is the single ontological symmetry break that God possesses against everything else. And that is the property to which a rational belief is pegged to, not the waxings of religion. And frankly, I do agree with you that many accounts, religious, are mythological. They are allegorical. They are a extended game of telephone that some abridged version we have transcribed. But in reality, perhaps things weren't as such in a magical sense. But that's nothing to say about the actual core property that is argued that God possesses prior to anything else.
Can I
Being what
respond
you
to some
said.
of those? So I am interested in the always existed. I do consider that the modern version of the theist. This is the way that many Jews, Christians, Muslims now see God as this omnipotent, omnipresent. They're everywhere. They know everything. They're all powerful. My problem is, how can you prove any of this? Where is any empirical evidence for such a God when they seem to be able to do everything?
So you're actually asking, where is the proof for that property, correct?
Well, it's
'Cause-
just weird. This God used to like talk with people one on one, and now I have to talk to his followers.
right. So this again, religion and the necessary ontology of God being.
His existence, sure.
So are we questioning that it is rational to believe in an uncaused cause?
Maybe we can win you over. And then once we win you over to deism, maybe we can get you to my specific religion. I think these were made by Muslim apologists that they call Dawahists, and then eventually picked up by Christian theologists here in the West. And it's not the real reason that you guys have believed. It's not you. It's not just you. This is almost all of the people that practice presuppositionalism and these types of first cause necessary contingent arguments. It would be nice if it would be just God came down to Moses and spoke to him, just like, if he's all powerful. If you say the Abrahamic school of thought. I mean, the Abrahamic school of thought, I think, has so many signs of being human made. Like, we just know where all of it came from. It's a
Okay,
lot.
again,
By all means.
it's a religion that you are having a gripe with, and that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. Maybe it's not your flavor of life. When it comes to the question of a necessary, immutable, infallible source from which reality emerges, this is something that is ubiquitously held in almost every philosophical worldview, especially ones that are grounded in empirical science. Like I heard in your opening statement, you referenced to CMB. So if you believe in that and you believe in the Big Bang, I mean, when it comes to the properties of the things from which this emerges, there isn't much of a asymmetry when you say that the universe emerged from some singularity. There's not an asymmetry. It's merely a replacement of semantic terms. This core property you're describing is exactly analogous.
Can I respond to that? So the Big Bang is the farthest back that we can go. In fact, what often happens is theists will ask us questions. Well, where did humans come from? Where did mammals come from? Well, where did multicellular organs come from? Where did life come from? Where did planets come from? Where did those chemicals come from? Where did the Big Bang come from? And we answer each one of those questions, and it's almost like they're waiting for us to hit, that wall. And then we said, well, that's the furthest back that we can go right now. And they say, ha, that's where God is. And it's like, well, you guys didn't answer any of the other stuff. Why should we take your word for it now?
You have to understand that prior to there being any religious thought on this, it was the realization, which is argued to be through divine revelation, of this necessary entity, if you choose to call it that. Now, you again seem to have this massive gripe with how this has been placated through history, what attributes this has taken on in a cultural lens. And there's a fine sentiment around that. However, there are certain things that seem to be immutable, that are unchanging, and govern the reality within which you exist. And for all intensive purposes, we investigate this state of affairs. and you call it chemistry, biology, even physics, underpinned even by mathematics and primeval statements of logic. It's merely an observation of the phenomenon that is in front of you. And the phenomenon that is in front of you truly is unexplained. If you have fooled yourself in thinking that we have an honest account of the affairs that happen locally, let alone cosmically, you have been completely misled.
Well, can
Truth be
I?
told, it is to
Okay.
conflate the map and the territory in the most egregious way. Even people like Leonard Susskind, the founders of string theory and concepts that aim to explain the universe, fully admits to the fact that it is merely a mathematical model that attempts to have a harmonious capacity to predict something.
So if I just interject, I will fully admit there's a lot of things within science that we don't know. I would say sometimes that's where the fun subjects are. Example, abiogenesis. What I would say the difficulty is I think we have a lot more evidence for an empirical backing of abiogenesis than for anything religious, spiritual, or holy about it. I do want to comment back to it. It's true. I have a gripe to pick with not only religion, but with the Abrahamic faith. However, I really go against theism at the very top level. I will really put a linchpin in this. I am for a completely physical, material consciousness. I do not believe that consciousness can exist outside the mind or the brain. I don't think it is isolated to humans. I think that it is an animal mechanism by which we gather energy. And not to be too specific, but to be too specific, I think it's our response into the fact that plants dominated the planet. And our niche was we have to move around and collect food. And I really struggle to understand why this consciousness exists for any reason besides to create us.
Well, therein comes the question that everybody wonders. Why? Why this? Why like this? And truth be told, I don't think there's a fully sound answer that will satisfy and satiate your soul, or anyone's for that matter. It is always a leap of faith. However, insofar as is there a curtain? If you were to think of this and as a stage, and perceiving the stage, you see a curtain. But behind that curtain lies the question, or rather the answer to the question, why? You are perceiving the curtain. That is without a question. And that curtain is what we call God. The properties behind that is the question of religion.
Can I pause you for why it's such a good analogy, but really for not the one you probably wanted to make? Because I feel like you're making a Wizard of Oz analogy. And what I think is the fantastic thing about that story, the moral really was they thought it was this like powerful being that could do them harm, when it was really just this nerdy guy behind pulling strings and really just making this scary act. And I mean, I think that fits wonderful for what I think people. There are true believers, and then there is religion has been used as a power to lord over people. I agree with you that half of it is my gripe with religion and my anti-theism and why I don't think religion should continue. And the other, I do think is this, we have this desire as conscious beings. We want to put consciousness everywhere. I deal with this with the pantheists who say that consciousness is fundamental. It's everywhere. I think that consciousness is wonderful and amazing, and I don't see why we need to put it before the universe.
Well, primarily it is because there seems to be this very confounding realization that there are two things that you perceive in your sensory state of affairs. Not only the material structure that we attempt to explain mathematically, but a thing we call qualia. And qualia is your perception of that and its unique, distinct properties. And that is a thing that even in physics is talked about, and that is called top-down causation. And that there isn't just a completely linear state of affairs, that there's also some asymmetry in that, and that asymmetry finds itself, as they argue, in places like wave function collapse, something becoming from form to an actual state of affairs.
But can I pause you? Because I am interested in qualia, and I believe it was Dan Dennett who coined it, and I not to be too on the nose, but as we continue to learn about consciousness, which field of study do you think is going to make more headway? And is it going to be theology or neurology? I mean, it's a baited question, but for to make that point.
I mean, immediately if you were to ask me, would I rather have my brain surgeon be somebody who's a Bible thumper because that's all he knows, or like a trained neurosurgeon? Of course, the trained neurosurgeon. There's a lot of practicality in these meaningful, like functional approaches to life. But the functional approach to life is still grounded in the fact that life is a phenomenon that is grounded in immutable principles that seem to not waver. And we take it for granted, like we do. But it's so for granted, matter of factly, that it's ubiquitously almost missed in physics. And people are just like, oh yeah. But these are things and the models that are described as constants, properties that seem to be immutable and are what literally ground and shape the model and its ability to emerge. And these constants we observe empirically in the world. Like the best example in physics is just the electromagnetic force. Do you actually, just for a second, sit back and think the degree of accuracy in manipulating this force and its predictable nature for us to be able to have this conversation right now? From my voice being transcribed, sent, configured on my phone, web servers across the world, back to you in what seems to be almost instantaneous. And we take it just like, oh yeah, that's just the way it is. But the reality of it is, it seems to be grounded in some immutable function, and this immutable function isn't the matter. The matter is
I can't
governing
explain
the
that.
values.
We
Well,
stand
how do
on
you
the
explain it?
shoulder. We stand on the shoulder of giants. It took many, many people to go through
Right?
a series of different inventions, and for us to actually not invent the electromagnetic field, but discover the electromagnetic field and be able to work with not only that, but us to channel electricity, us to eventually go from simple mathematic devices, I would say the simplest being an abacus, all the way up to early computers. You're right. We do take it for granted. It is amazing. I think sometimes, we can't, it's hard to believe that we walk around with these amazing computers. But what I do want to draw back to a point that you also brought up, because you were kind of alluding to the point of fine-tuning. And fine-tuning, I think, is done a disjustice by the apologists, because really what it means is if the constants were different, we wouldn't be alive. But it assumes that us being alive is the goal, because there are ways in which we can manipulate the universe and make it more fine-tuned for life. We can make the habitable zones way bigger in the solar systems. Every planet would be teeming with life. And yet it seems to be this very rare thing in only certain circumstances. And so I'm glad that we're alive, but it also makes sense. It's not, there were some words that it's not you, it's this is what we get from a lot of theists, which
All
is
right, well, let me interrupt
oh
you
no,
here for
go,
a second.
yeah, okay, I'll bring up more. Respond by all means.
For a second, yes. The fine-tuning situation isn't that the constants would be different and we would all be dead. That is yet again a silly misrepresentation of the map against the territory. The map, which is the model. Yes, if the variables in the model are adjusted ever so slightly, then the model mathematically, given its attempt at functionally approximating things, even as brute as an area under the curve, realistically, that is not an adequate representation of reality. And it is, again, to be as foolish as to think, because these conjectures come and have explanatory value and allow us to manipulate reality, that the actual malleability of it is mistaken for its origin and its actual function. We merely mold it within certain constraints, but even beyond those constraints, it eludes us. And this illusion is ever so clearly present when you have quantum tunneling on processors. To a certain scale, we simply cannot constrain it with these brute mechanics anymore. And so to be fooled into thinking that we have, truth be told, even in physics, a genuine understanding of quantum mechanics, let alone an explanation as to why it is the way it is silly. We don't. No one does. It just is this way. But what we know is that it is this way immutably. And this way doesn't seem to be governed by the physics itself, by the matter. The matter seems to be manifested from it in almost a higher dimension, in a dimension that isn't of the physical nature. And if you want to ask, what is this substrate? Can you point this substrate to me in empirical sciences? Look no further than quantum field theory. That is the assertion that there are fields that are not of physical substrate, yet govern and emerge from it, the physical substrate around you. So it's a completely rational belief, because this belief is the perspective of literally the only perspective that offers any explanatory value. And if you ask yourself, what again is the principle of rationality? Like, what does it even mean to be rational? To be able to explain something. If you do things with literally no causal relationship or any explanation as to why you did something, that is what you call irrational. Would I do that right now? So the ability to explain the causal chain of events is rationale. That is what we
Okay.
understand it to be. So the explanation of these causal events and the assertion that it is grounded in some immutable principle is not only what we do in physics, but what is necessary for physics to exist.
I semi agree with the last part. Some of the things you say, I agree with, because you're just saying science, but then it moves into theology, and I feel like sometimes they want to take credit. Like, so God, I believe, doesn't have any explanatory value. You're right that in our universe, it seems like everything has a causal chain. The problem that I have is going all the way past the Big Bang, where things become, as you at least semi alluded, well, it doesn't matter, that it becomes quantum. That's the problem that we have with trying to tie the big and the small right now. It's kind of where we're stuck. It is where physicists are working, and so we don't really understand it. And yet, I would say we're describing things. I'm not too far away from at least something you kind of alluded to. I agree. We're describing. I think we discovered a lot of these physics principles. We're not prescribing them as if we're a pharmacist, but I will continue to
Yeah.
say, if we were looking back, what does a God get us that, say, in eternal universe, or I don't understand why quantum field theory would be an equivalent? Because to get back to the very specific God, is it the one of the Abrahamic tradition, or do you worship the quantum field theory? Because I feel like this is what very specific versions of Christianity and Islam, to get back to what I said in my opening, at least that is the partakers of them so far. I don't understand why argue these, and why wouldn't you want to tie something back to, as you said, the Abrahamic tradition?
Exactly. And therein is where I began this pursuit some years ago. And I was astounded to find things that revealed to me this understanding. And it was very profound where I found it too. It wasn't like I read deep somewhere in Ecclesiastes or in Luke some claims about something. It was in the first 3 sentences of Genesis. And having had grounded myself first in physics and understanding the world through empirical sciences, I opened up these words and I read through them, and it appeared to me almost instantaneously, in some odd way, this immediate parallel between the logical argument, especially architecturally presented, and the words written on the page. It said, God created the heavens and the earth, which is the position of some ability to determine change, or a delta. And that is like the core principle of mathematics, is that exact principle, to be able to determine a delta. And in physics, that is necessary. And that delta occurs between two things.
Can I
Distinct.
pause you for a second?
Please don't.
Okay,
And
continue.
in the first position is that. Then it almost explicitly tells you that the Spirit of God is hovering over the waters with an S. And this immediately seemed to me very analogous to the position that we have fields with an S, multitude of these fields, and they are the fundamental constituent of reality. And the last statement is God spoke, in an almost very synonymous parallel to how we understand sound, as a wave propagating, that the first state, the most fundamental as could be described, is the propagation of the wave. God said, "Let there be light." And the "let there be light" statement is completely reflected in every single model of physics, where there is some initial inertial something. As they say, what breathes life into the equations? There is something. And this parallel, this 3 sentences in sequential order, in exactly the same ontological frame we argue, that to me seemed like a very strong piece of evidence as to how could this knowledge have been attained, and how is it that the assertions therein seem to be reflected in the real world. I mean, dare I say, go back 1,000 years and ask anyone, or even 500 years, ask anyone as an empiricist of the world 300, even 200 years ago, what is the fundamental constituent of reality? Mostly, I would argue, to an overwhelming majority, they would say it is something, some physical thing, like an atom, perhaps. But we have now unfolded reality to such a depth that we come to realize this isn't the case. And Einstein's revelation seems almost forgotten, as oh, it's just the case. But how could you make an assertion about reality in the first function being a let there be light, exactly as we understand it today? What gave you the confidence to be able to make such a statement?
Well, I would say because they were scribes who were either creating a narrative or believed the story or a little bit of both. What I do want to comment on a few of those things. One, that yes, I've heard that God created the heavens and the earth. What I would say is annoying about these three sentences is they can be interpreted in 1,000 different ways. And it could be, it's almost like a scale between poetry and science. And that makes me worried because it becomes much more harder to prove empirically. And I want to go into some of the logistics. So for example, we did not have light after the Big Bang. There was about 100 to 400 million years before the first suns actually ignited and the universe actually had some form of light. I like waves and sound waves, and I mean, it's amazing that we communicate, but I don't understand how speaking would be a form of creation. And again, this just brings me back. If it's poetry, that's beautiful. You can inspire me. If it's literal, how does that work?
Did you say 500 million years?
100 to 400 million years, yes, for the first suns to turn on.
Check this out. Mom
Do it.
Z14 should look into this. It's a paper published 2025, I believe March of this year. Mom Z14 is a supermassive galaxy that, according to the way in which we do this spectrographical measurement of redshift, calibrated to the CMB with a z-shift of 14, is argued to be 270 million years old. 270 million years old, not for a cluster,
That's
not
between
for
my range, okay.
270 million years for a fully formed spiral galaxy that is indistinguishable from things distant to us. So the proposition that this timing of the CMB is adequate isn't. It's going out the window. And if you keep up with modern day literature on this topic, you'll see that it's an inevitability. The reality of this situation is that as the most fundamental substrate, the most irreducible substrate of reality, we understand it to be.
Getting a little Jordan Peterson-y, but keep going.
We understand the foundation of this being raw energy. And when you speak of raw energy in this sense and how we understand it, it is literally light. It's emissions of this. And it's
There was energy, sure, but
yeah.
it says light, doesn't it? It says let there be light. Now we're getting abstract. This is what I mean. Those three sentences could be interpreted a million different ways. Sounds like Taco's about to join in.
And real fast, there's a super chat. Chad, is it rational to believe in God?
Well, there's the yes and the no position.
Thank you, Nobody on Fire.
Well, I'm sending so much love.
And before I hand it back over, if y'all have any more questions, remember it's $5 super chat gets you a question to the debaters. $2 gets displayed on the screen. So if you want to extend the debate or just ask a question to your favorite debater, consider submitting a super chat and supporting this show. But Chad, is it rational to believe in God? Handing it back over to
you. Yeah. I mean, I've kind of covered that and we moved on a little bit, but it's absolutely rational. It's the position that there is a explanatory cause to reality. And if you are somebody who, again, tries to ground themselves in empirical science and physics and all of these things, you must understand that that principle, the principle of doing science, is the assertion that things have a cause and a sequence of events that actually are real and that they can be repeated. Very important part about science, right? And so this proposition is firmly grounded in the fact that the universe would not escape this principle. And to be rational, to believe that things.
You're saying everything must have a cause except for this one thing. And then when atheists point to anything else, you say, no, that thing has to be contingent. And then we say, well, okay, then if everything must have a cause, what is your God made of? And then they always say the same thing. That's not the same question. Don't you understand? This is the one thing that isn't contingent on anything. And we're like, yeah, but there's lots of other options that we can point to. So why is it that why is your God? And specifically, I mean, keep on hitting that nail, why does that have to be the Abrahamic God?
Notice how you don't actually deny the ontological nature of that state of affairs. You merely question what is it called.
No. I think that we know how these gods were formed. The Jews were a tribe of the Canaanites. They broke off from the Canaanites, and then they were very angry at their former tribe, and that's where all the animosity came from, because they have a specific god, El. From that, they kept on doing their tradition until their second temple fell, and then they began to write their holy text down. So born, unfortunately, were the first fundamentalists, because now it's turning from oral tradition into written tradition. Then you have Jesus. Jesus now opens it up to non-Jews. Now it starts to spread. Now Muhammad gets word of it. We have more prophets. Now Joseph Smith utilizes it. I don't think he was very convinced of it himself as much as the others. Nonetheless, we know the history and the motivations and the how Zoroastrianism is where Christianity and Islam got their versions of heaven and hell and darkness and light. And so the Abrahamic faith is such a human religion. And it is both of these buckets. I mean, I could go in either one, because I do not like the consciousness one either. Like, I don't understand why it can't just be quantum fields, why it can't just be the singularity. I am open to a first cause. I don't take a position either way, because I don't think we know. But that's the whole point, is that I don't think that any of those deistic thought experiments, syllogisms, ever get us to an empirical evidence, to a God who claims to be very powerful.
Yeah, it's seemingly a little bit of a silly proposition. Give me God in grams is a silly way to say what you're saying.
Can
And
I?
it's
Okay,
not
continue.
a sound proposition, because the thing that you are understanding, yet again, is the rationality of grounding something. And you say, even in your position, that, oh, what is it? Why is it not just quantum fields or a singularity? Well, those things have an identity, an ontology that is irreducible. You do not claim that there's anything beneath them. And if you do, then that becomes the thing that is more primitive than it. The argument is that there is an ontology that is most primitive, that is inescapable. And that is the property when we say the word God.
Okay,
And then people come along and make arguments that, in virtue of this realization, because it is something that must be understood.
But let's put two sides. We have an eternal universe that comes from a singularity, and we have an eternal God. Is there a difference, or are you just saying that singularity is now God?
I'm saying to you that that proposition is one that is heinous to your ancestors, and it kind of somewhat disrespectful, because
okay.
the ontology of what you are describing is one that was accounted for long ago. For example, imagine I came around and I started spouting the idea that I invented the ability to integrate the area under a curve. And I said, I came up with calculus. And people would be like, no, you didn't. And I would be like, yes, I did, because look, I called it something different. But
But
it's the exact same thing ontologically. And then you would be like, no, listen, guys, you're the ones who are just using the word calculus. I mean, it's my thing, right? Now, that is what is happening here. This property, as I told you, has been grounded in scripture and is well understood in many verses that
is
nothing
it?
is prior to God, that is his most quintessential property. And even when Moses asked, and then people reference back this all the time, God says, I am that I am. It's the property of the irreducibility of the most fundamental state of affairs. And so you yourself would be silly to deny this because you yourself believe it.
I do
And to
not.
believe it is to argue that there is a rational perspective of reality. Because
Not
if you don't
only
understand that, you don't have rationale.
Not only do I not believe it, but I think it is the opposite. I think your God is contingent on us to exist. The only way that he can exist is through scripture, our brain, and other media, if we make movies or TV shows about them. But if the planet were to go away, I believe that so too would your God. Oh, I hit the microphone. So too would your God. I understand kind of what you're saying with the calculus thing. Like, yeah, if you're going around telling people that you're this big deal and all this stuff, it kind of seems kind of snooty. Can I actually tie that back to religion? I have a big beef to pick with prophets. I don't like prophets. I don't like anyone who says that they are the liaison with God. We're instantly suspicious of everyone who would say that in a modern day, but for some reason, thousands of years ago, it makes perfect sense. I don't think Jesus, no, from what I know of the Bible, I don't think Jesus would have called himself a god, and I don't think that prophets exist. And so, yes, any thoughts on that?
As far as Christ being a God,
Well,
he
I
wouldn't
oh no,
describe
go.
himself like this. No, I don't think. And you also must remember that these are memoirs and accounts written by men whose accounts have been transcribed by other men and whose
And real
teachings
fast, there are
have
a couple. Oh, sorry. Yeah, there
there's
are a couple super chats. So, Chad from Nobody on
oh,
Fire, have you covered it? Amy, what the fuck is going on? LMAO. I think he's talking about the steak. Have you covered the steak?
yeah, it's just chilling. I just like to get it like room temperature, you know.
So it is
I'm about to
covered.
cook it.
Okay, cool. And then Ken Bush says, "Who or what?" or asks, "Who or what created God? Do you think it's logical to believe that a God who created everything appeared out of nowhere?" Thank you so much for the super chats, everybody. And if you have any more super chat questions, make sure to get those in. Those do add to the timer.
I will say that I never hear atheists talk about nothing except for Lawrence Krauss's book, in which he really talked about it because all of the theists talked about it. Things like random and chance and nothing, these are all tend to be theistic words that they throw at us, but I don't even believe in a nothing. I always say, show me evidence of a nothing, and I'll start to believe in it. And that's where we generally say, well, if it has a property, then it's not a nothing.
Yeah, well, that's the rational position, isn't it? And the rational position would be
We
to
found
say
common ground. See?
exactly that, that the rational position is to believe that there is a grounding to reality, and this grounding to reality was first explicated as a necessary state of affairs in these works. And the argument is that there has
So,
been a
so
lot
Chad,
of
the question was, who or what created God? Do you think it's logical to believe that a God who created everything appeared out of nowhere?
I know what his answer is, but it's a good question.
yeah, it's a silly sounding question in the sense that it negates the proposition I've been trying to deliver this entire time, is that there is an ontological state of affairs from which something is unconditional. Your question even begs it, you ask, what is the source of the non-conditional? And the answer to that question is it is non-conditional. That is the position, and that is the ontology of this entity you are describing. And the argument as to how and why would anyone say that this entity would even have a possession such as a mind or any of these things? Well, it boils down to a very simple deduction and a realization, and things that we even argue exist in mathematics called set theory, that since you, as a subset of this irreducible property, have consciousness, have perception of reality, then that is begotten from the source. And the source must pertain and uphold it, for you are a subset of it. And when you ask what is the investigation into that question and how this is governed, that is the pursuit of physics. That's where it emerged from in the first place. Why did men even begin this ridiculous pursuit of trying to understand reality? Because they understood that there seems to be something that grounds it, that could be understood, could be mapped, could be predicted. And that is rationale. That is what grounds every single thing you come around and hundreds of years later piggyback off of, like you say, standing on the shoulders of giants, without giving any credence to where the foundations of this idea even emerged from, the capacity to think that such a pursuit would even yield anything.
Well, I could tell you where it comes from, because that's a common question we could ask. Where does intelligibility come from? And about that question, that last question, also, what's up, nobody on fire? I didn't get to say hi. But that last question was dealing with his existence. Can I just ask you a quick series of questions, which is, do you believe that everything that exists has a cause?
Everything that exists has a cause.
Yes.
Seems to be the principle of sufficient reason, yes.
Does God exist?
Well, God is the necessary existence. That is the sufficient explanation to the original cause upon which something is
So
claimed to
yes.
have any causal contingency.
So yes.
No, this is just a semantic trick.
But I mean, does he exist?
It's just a rhetorical
I
semantic
just.
trick.
You say
You know
it's
what this
funny
is
that you
called?
call they. And I know
This is called Russell's paradox. This is nothing new. It's a set of all sets, is what you're describing.
let me just finish the conclusion.
Oh, okay.
If everything that exists has a cause, and
Mhm.
God exists, then God has a cause.
Here's the thing. The proposition is what you're describing is called Russell's paradox. Russell's paradox is actually, if you'd be funny enough to investigate this, the singular paradox that is negated in mathematical set theory called Frankeli's Zarello set theory, which is the foundation of algebra, C-star algebra, which emerges all of the things that you take for granted in set theory. And all of the things, again, you say are the rational explanation of reality. So you can't have it both ways. You cannot simultaneously argue that Russell's paradox has any validity, because to say that is to negate the foundational assertion which is necessary to have mathematical set theory. And mathematical set theory is the foundation of the thing that you piggyback off of. Talking about string theory, talking about electromagnetic fields and our descriptions of them. What is this all grounded in? You
Well,
cannot have it both ways.
I would say that if you're asking about intelligibility, it's grounded in our brains, our minds, and our consciousness. If you're asking the universe, it is being run by the physical laws of nature.
All right, and then nobody on fire asked, Chad, does God know he is all-knowing? How? No circular answers, please.
Guys, he's all knowing. Well, hold on. No circular answers as he hits me with a circular question. How's that fair?
That's what he said. I don't make the
How's that
rules.
fair, dude? That's going bad.
They're the bosses, not me.
All right. Well, doesn't God know He's all knowing? Well, the proposition, as is understood within my theology, is that God is Himself perfectly, and in virtue of that, He would possess the qualities that are Himself perfectly. And to say He knows Himself perfectly is just a rhetorical instrument. It does not carry any more weight beyond saying He is Himself. To say He knows Himself perfectly, or He is divine, or He is, these are all the same attributes. They're just rhetorical devices that carry the exact same ontological mapping. And it's very important when you ask yourself these questions to step outside the realm, which is really the question of, can you have objective oriented thinking? Which is somewhat a question of IQ, but dare I say, it's important to think of the world ontologically, not semantically, not in the words, but in its actual properties. And when you ask about the actual properties of what we're describing here, it's real. That it would be this state of affairs. And so I don't know how else to answer it apart from,
Gotcha. And then Big Bad Mama asks
conversation.
Chad, why does reality need a grounding or a source when change is the only thing that is permanent and inevitable in life?
You might want to say that one more time, bro. I kind of.
Yeah, why does reality need a grounding or a source when change is the only thing that is permanent and inevitable in life?
Well, therein lies the even rhetorically funny way to present this. You just merely replace change with this immutable entity. You not entity maybe, but property that we're describing here. And so when you say change is the only thing that's fundamental, well, that is a fundamental, irreducible thing. Do you not understand that you're merely attributing something else outside of it, but within that proposition is nested the same claim? You're basically saying that there's also an ontology to it. This ontology we define as delta, change, the ability to perceive something in one and another state. Okay, wonderful. That's like maybe P2. But P1 of your proposition is that it's immutable, that this is the core state. And that is the proposition of God, that there's a core immutable identity that grounds reality. And if you, as a subset of it, possess consciousness, then dare I say it is what is necessitated mathematically due to set theory that it would possess something like this due to the fact that you as a subset of it possess this. And this is the pursuit of religion. The idea that you could somehow, in some faculties, achieve this. And it's
Okay.
been, yeah.
And I'm going to go to the next question. Thank you for the answer. This one is for the both of y'all. And if y'all have more questions, make sure to get those in. And remember, each question adds some time. So, well, it'll make up for the time.
Could I, before you go on, just really
Sure.
quickly, just because I was making sure, I was double checking. Yeah, immutable means unchanging. And I just don't understand how that and consciousness can possibly go together, because consciousness to me seems like an ever-changing phenomena. It almost seems like that is its job, to deal in what we would call real-time phenomena, so we don't get eaten by predators, so we can go out there and collect food, get rid of food, sometimes mate. All of these hated them. You know, they were trying to survive in the desert. People were asking them questions. They came up with good stories so they can keep on moving. It's that thousands of years later, it's outdated technology. It has some good in it because, you know, it had things like community. It had things like getting over. Sometimes it gave hope when we didn't have it. However, I think we can find that in other places. And I think that the goal of immortality, the goal of living forever, They are fun things to think about, and yet this is the one and only life that I have, and I have no reason to think deism is true at this time. So get me over that line, but right now, yes.
I have a hard time understanding the correlation between immortality and free will. If that is
Well,
your
I
question, I
yeah.
don't really see a correlation of any kind that is meaningful. I guess to explicate on that further if you want, but as far as free will and believing that there's some governance and punishment to the actions in this world is a belief that is virtuous and a belief that I find also rational because that is the way in which you live and perceive reality. And I don't think there's anything that is more, kind of intellectually lowbrow is to miss the bigger picture of something and to cling on to the absolute details in some way to negate it and not realize that many of the things that you're clinging into are exactly the things you yourself proclaim are man-made. And it's like, okay, yeah, wonderful. Yes, I agree. We all would agree, many of the people in this world today. And still simultaneously denouncing the absolute biggest picture of it all is the assertion is there is something immutably that grounds and has given act to this world. And you are an agent of it. And to deny that you are an agent of it is silly. And then comes the seemingly immediate proposition. There must be some reason as to why this is. I mean, couldn't just be just like if you were just to say God's just bored and he's whatever, he had nothing to do. Well, I don't know. That's again doesn't seem to have reason or what you call
But can I
rationale.
ask you?
And
Let
if you are to say for a second, if you're to say there is a rationale to this world, then you perceive this rationale in the sense of judgment for what you do in this actual physical realm. And that judgment, I agree with you, perhaps, the layers of Dante's Inferno aren't an actual empirical account of hell. That is, again, a silly gripe with religion, but the proposition that there is some damnation, and this damnation is the ultimate punishment, is the claim.
see,
Then,
but can
yeah,
I pause you for that? Because you kind of accuse me lightly of playing both sides, but don't you play both sides? You are both saying that there is this necessary grounds of reality, and you are also saying you are part of the Abrahamic faith. And I mean, why, if you're going to be part of that tradition, don't you think it comes along all of the baggage that has been with it for the thousands? But it's like, if you are going to be this deistic, if you are going to say, look, why I believe in God, I believe there is this necessary being, this contingent,
Okay, can
necessary
you hold that
element.
thought for a second? So we're at
Oh, yeah.
44 additional minutes right now.
Mm.
The initial hour just ended. There's still so once I finish talking, I'll start that. But there's still 16 additional minutes available from super chat. So let's get those super chats in if y'all have any additional questions. But right now they have 44 out of 60 additional minutes available for the mega bloodbath debate. Super chats, comments, get those in. We'll get those displayed on the screen or asked here throughout the debate. I do have a couple more super chats that I do need to read out, but I'm handing it back to you, Amy. I just want to let you know the time was being added on, and any additional time will get added on without interruption.
No, it's just I wish I could win you over, maybe if not just to atheism, to deism, because I don't understand what is it that separates the grounding of nature, being a contingent being, what makes it grounded in the Abrahamic faith?
Lots of things. I mean, to speak frankly, culture.
Mm-hmm.
It's grounded in history. It's grounded in a degree of pride, a degree of
At least you're being honest.
family and lineage, and it's a reflection of um, many things: historical accounts, primarily witness testimony, and it is the position that has grounded the world you see around you today, and it has fundamentally emerged from it, and its roots go very far and deep.
Can
And
I?
for that reason, to deny its authenticity and the claims therein, especially when you put them up against the rigor that I'm trying to present to you, is just to
Sure.
be, it's just to want to be different,
The
to want to be.
authenticity, I'm not challenging. Because I will say, the one people I don't blame is the people who actually wrote the book. Because I think the Jews and the Christians really did write what they believed. I have the problem with it has been thousands of years. And I appreciate what you told me. You said culture, history, pride, lineage, eyewitness testimony. I appreciate all of those, but you notice how much of a different realm that is from the cosmic microwave background radiation. And so I I
Mhm.
say, I know this sounds funny. I'm trying to think of examples, but I say oy vey, I say schmuck. I mean, I don't dislike the fact that I come from, Jewish parents. I love them. I think they are amazing individuals. I hope to be as half as good as they are. I don't want to insult my ancestors. I don't want to be like you stupid, etc., etc., because a lot of them were the smartest of their time period. I guess what I want to say is you could still love all of that. You could still appreciate and continue to learn all of that while focusing more on a deistic mindset, because that already seems like where you're going anyway. Yeah.
So you kind of mistake me saying culture and pride and these
Mm-hmm.
properties for the authenticity and truth inside of it. That was an answer to the question of why
What's the
is
truth?
this something that is valuable to me, important to me? Why is it a thing in history as I perceive that question? So that's what I was trying to answer there. And so far as how the CMB and all the things relate, I've tried to explain in the fact that they are underpinned by a proposition that there's something immutable that is grounding the emergence of the even formulaic presentation and understanding of the laws that are governing the dynamics for that emergence. So, and that's again mistaking a claim for being just words to being an ontology that is necessary.
But can I
Nobody can escape
ask,
this necessary
what
ontology.
is so special about being immutable, about being unchanging? You can never change anything about you.
Well, immutability is yet again a property that is a synonym for the ontology that you're trying to represent of something wholly singular and as pure act. And in that sense, words become rather useless rhetorical instruments because you fail to be able to capture the ontology of what you are
Can
describing.
I explain where I think? Like, I'll give you an example.
Let me
Both.
finish one thing. It
All
would be
right. Sounds
exactly
good.
analogous as to saying, or trying to beg the question, what happened before the Big Bang? So let's say, because the proposition of that claim is that temporal relationships cease to exist. and yet you invoke a question about what are the temporal relationships. So it's what's happening here is very similar to this.
We could have a multiverse. We could have a singularity in which it changes, or it could have been some other way. We don't know, but I just don't understand it. Not only that, but it's also separating out, again, the deistic concept from the very Abrahamic concept, which is that God seems to change their mind all the time. I mean, it had 2 books, 3 books, sometimes 4 books, depending on which version of the Abrahamic tradition that you are accepting. And although you're being very big tent to Abrahamic religions, most of them have fought very vicious wars with each other, saying that they are very much different gods. Now, I let you guys figure that out, but I still don't figure. Can I ask, do you believe that Adam and Eve, Moses and Noah, they were all literal people?
All right, check this out. So that's how I understand it. Adam and Eve is the proposition. As we try to equilaterally map such a thing, is the argument that there is some morphological change that has occurred. And that morphological change had finally hit a pinnacle. And that pinnacle was the first man. And equally, we make the argument in evolutionary biology that necessarily at some actual point in time, there was some genetic mutation that was sufficient to actually catalyze this onset of whatever. And so it's similarly the exact same ontological argument. Is there was a first man, a first, what we nowadays perhaps call a Homo sapien. When it comes to the question of Noah, yeah, there's something called the Younger Dryas period. It occurred it ended about 10,500 years ago, started about 700,000, something like this, 11,700. And it was like a long period. And this is what we call the Ice Age. And a lot of people forget that, or don't even know, that a lot of these glaciers stretched as far as Germany. And these were mile-high glaciers, and the ecosystem of the world is completely different. I mean, the Sahara Desert was a luscious green place, and we have plenty of evidence for this. And further, satellite imaging shows us that there seems to be this massive erosion pattern that goes from the north of Africa to the west coast of it. And it's quite a confusing conundrum because it's a thing. Archaeologically, we have an insurmountable degree of evidence for this. And the melting of these glaciers has been a very rapid thing, but at some point they extended, dare I say, perhaps far beyond our novel estimates. And if that is the case, which is an edge possibility, even if you just simply analyze it statistically, then the melting of such glaciers at some point would actually hit a critical mass. And that critical mass would have been exactly as described biblically as a great flood. Now, the understanding that there's some wisdom to be had with the foresight of such an event is argued that it's divine. But this divine
But you
revelation,
do believe in a great flood?
as far as was there a flood somewhere around, I would say 6,000 to 7,000 years ago, archaeologically seems like a very sound idea, yes.
Local? Global?
So it would not be a global flood, obviously. I mean, there's a limited amount of water on this planet currently. So
you got more rational just by that statement.
it's a description of the fact that in their local jurisdiction where they exist, that this was covering everything. And you must understand that this is written from the perspective of people who lived in a very low at that time,
But
actually geographical mountainous region. So to them, having a mountain covered was a great thing, but it wasn't covering Mount Everest. Like, are we being serious? But they didn't live near Mount Everest, and they didn't have airplanes, and didn't travel. So to them, a mountain in their world was quite literally.
But
when they
doesn't this
speak of
create other
this,
problems? Because it
no,
doesn't
it
matter
doesn't.
local or like local or global. Like now we have a local flood. What is God even doing? He's just drowning a bunch of local people because he just thinks they're he thinks they're evil. I don't know why we're collecting 2 of every animal at this point, because there's animals in other places, but I guess he just likes those animals.
Yeah, it's what it is, and you cannot deny what it is. It's a historical account of events.
Oh, I
And
can
so,
deny that. It's not
insofar
historical.
as its actual, like, 2 of every animal, all of these things,
Did
it's
not happen.
that
The boat
part of
couldn't
it,
exist
I
like
would
that.
agree with you, is again mythological. It's a game of telephone. But the statement, the historical statement that there was a time when there was this massive flood that occurred
Lots of floods, though.
is actually substantiated. And it
I
seems
agree
to
with
be,
you.
yeah,
Thousands of
and
floods,
it
probably
seems
more.
very clear that the ability to have some foresight for this gave these people a massive leg up in the world that
I was gonna
emerged out of
say, let's
this.
go back,
All right.
not to use a pun.
This seems a little bit off topic, so let's pull it back on topic with a couple super chats. These are just comments, but feel free to respond. This is from the earlier conversation. Kieran Dave, thank you so much for the super chat. He says, "Hi, Chad. This wasn't Russell's paradox. You're simply wrong. Feel free to respond to that or ignore it."
I will say, just looking it up from casual, it says Russell's paradox is a logical contradiction in naive set theory that arises from the concept of the set of all sets that are not members of themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
And
And
then Nobody
that's
on Fire says, "So every time someone asks a question, you'll say, 'God answers that, and we are foolish to question that.'" Got it. And if you guys have any more questions for our debate, guys and gals have any more questions for our debaters, don't forget to get your super chats in. We still have like 17 or 13 minutes available on the additional timer. Sorry. So every time someone asks a question, you'll say, "God answered that, and we're foolish to question that." Got it.
yeah, the way in which I invoked Russell's paradox, which is a set of all sets, exactly, and it was negated by Zermelo, Frank Kelly's set theorem, which is the foundation of mathematics, set theory in general, is the proposition: does God have an origin? The question is there a set that supersedes this set? That is the question. That is what you're asking. If you were to take that and take a basic mathematics course, logic, you would quickly, hopefully, rationally realize that that is exactly the proposition you're making.
But
And
why?
what is being rational, what is being mathematical, what is being empirical, is being exactly in opposition to that proposition, the idea that Russell's paradox is real. Because if it is, that point in time, you negate mathematical set theory and you have nothing, nothing, literally nothing. Just go and investigate this topic for yourself and understand that this is the inevitability of this reality. If you want to invoke addition, if you want to invoke identity of any kind, you must have this. Otherwise, your mathematics doesn't mean anything, doesn't have any value.
I don't mean to go back to it. I just want to ask a simple question, because we are talking about rationality and rationality. Noah, 950 years old when he died.
Yeah. I mean, listen, this is where it gets a little bit wonky because I agree with you. Yeah, this is clearly some man-made conjecture, and maybe what they're trying to deliver in that sense is there was some sort of difference, but this difference maybe is over amplified. And dare I say, isn't it what we argue that there are morphological, biological changes that aggregate over time? And perhaps maybe it is a bit audacious, dare I say, to think that we are the pinnacle. Maybe we're not. Maybe we're akin to perhaps closer to a cockroach that survived because the cockroach could have survived. Perhaps maybe there was some other bloodline of humans that we are yet to discover. Maybe they weren't billions of them to find. You know, recently, not even a year ago, we found a skull that pushes back human evolution over 1 million years. Like the argument, and this is massive. I mean, these timelines are shifting. So it is not an impossibility, and it is a bit arrogant. And this is kind of the great slight of atheism is this arrogance to perceive that even down to the fact that we somehow are the greatest evolutionary pinnacle that has ever graced this planet. Maybe there really was
disagree.
a set of these people who lived to be 700 years old, but they were so genetically distinct from us that we were like donkeys to them, or they donkeys to us, and couldn't do anything about it. And that was just the reality of it until it ended, until their lineage just no longer existed. Perhaps it was that they became such because of their inability to procreate. Maybe there's some sort of genetic anomaly that occurred to them, that they themselves became sterile. This isn't something that is outside of the realm of possibility. Now, granted, do we have archaeological evidence for this? No. But what do we have a lot of? Many of the things in the Bible have actually been verified archaeologically. Tremendous findings, historical accounts. And to say that there is no chance of possibility that something like this actually could have been is to be
But
arrogant.
it could have been. It could have been. What's up, the freak? Sending so much love. He's also a theist, but I'm sad we love the freak. Can I also offer the alternative? It could be that, or it could be that they chose 950 and just put it in there, and just thought that that was a cool number to set for his age, and they didn't think that 2,000 years there would be people arguing over the date that he picked.
I
I'm
mean,
just saying. It
you
could be
can reduce
both.
that to anything.
Either.
I understand it's pure testimony, so I understand that, but to me, I find it far more fascinating to account for this in a way in which does have some historical semblance. Because as you investigate this topic, you start to see that there is a lot of things that are true, even down to the fact that some people like to bring up the idea that there's slavery in the Bible, there's selling of people, there's laws of murder. These are all things that are very historically real and are accounted for. And so it doesn't shy away from the brutality of humanity. And so for that reason, it gives me holistic credence that perhaps it also doesn't shy away too far away from what we know of written history. Because dare I say to you, someone who thinks empirically and wants to ground themselves in empiricism, you really.
Well, and I do want to ask you another question. I think it's another hard seller for atheism. God really got the slavery one wrong. Really could have kind of fumbled that football when seems like an objective moral God would have not had to play the, well, it was the times card.
Well, it's not that it's the times, it's that again you mistake religion for God.
Because
They're two very
you're
distinct
not the
things.
Abrahamic faith anymore?
Well, the Abrahamic faith, as I tell you, is an account of historical reality. And do we agree that slavery was a thing? Of course we do. And does it account for that? Of course it does.
Wait, can I ask you one
Unmistakably.
more? Do we both agree that slavery's bad?
I mean, morally, it isn't something that is, I guess, acceptable in a sense. However, slavery and bondage and servitude, in many cases, is a kind of a relationship of actually progressing knowledge in the world. And that's what it was like at that time, or at least would, to my rationale, seem quite obvious.
But doesn't that, aren't you saying the thing that you were trying to say they're not doing?
What?
You're playing the times. God was young. It was a different time back then. Slavery was all around. What was God gonna do? He hung out with the wrong crowd.
I mean, again, it's you are playing the sleight of hand of God being some anthropomorphized entity who is doing these things, and we both agree that this is a thing that was used to present a idea, not that many of these things are actually literally physically real. And to play this dichotomy, to constantly ebb and flow between, oh, is this like somewhat metaphysical in a sense, or is this hyper literal? Um, Many of the things that you asked about, there are very concrete understandings. Like again, the flood, Noah, the Garden of Eden, and how they have a distinct ontology with the idea they're trying to represent. And uh, this is something that has been passed through history to us, and it's an account of truth. And truth, again, is the argument that there is something that is grounding it, that makes it true. And to believe that is to be rational. That is rationality at its core. It's the most rational thing to believe.
And
It's just
yet
in
I
being insufficient. Like you just don't like religion. Like to you, it just kind of like rubs you the
no,
wrong way.
it's
But
not
it
about that.
also, on a different perspective, it's also some people really like it. Like I mean, the Crusades, the pride of Christianity, sacrifice the ability to carry a burden and not fold. Many of the things in Christianity are very profound and very beautiful. And quite frankly, if you ask somebody in a almost objective sense, what are some of the greatest artworks of the world we've seen? So many of them are actually present in these
But you mean
divinely,
subjective.
biblically inspired places.
You don't mean objective. I'm okay if he's saying subjectively, people on Earth, this is one of the most popular. I would even say, judging aesthetic beauty. I might even agree with you. But this is my problem with religion, is that it is a subjective experience claiming objectivity, especially when it comes to morality. And I would say overarchingly, it is not true. The claims in the Bible are not true. Like Adam and Eve, the creation story, the Noah story, Jesus coming back from the dead, all of these things, the miracle claims. I mean, if you were to just take the Thomas Jefferson approach and remove every miracle and say these are the moral teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, you might have more of a sell to me. But again, it always goes back to deism, which is what he was. There is something, and I agree with you. I do have an anti-theist bent to me, but it truly is only 50% because I do not like the idea of a conscious being existing outside of a mind and a body, because I don't think there's any good empirical evidence for it. I'm open to being wrong, but right now, the only creators we know of are animals. Birds make nests, beavers make dams, we make houses. We are creators. We make artificial things. And it's just so foreign to me to even put a deistic God who had no control over it at the beginning of the universe, because that would still be it would be a complex organism before any form of complexity. It would be like a sandwich. When it makes a lot more sense to me logistically, things start out simple, and over time, things just get more complex.
See, this is where you invoke physics of George Ellis, of top-down causation. And top-down causation is exactly what you say when you mean we do things. Yeah, I mean, in an irreducible sense, you could argue your consciousness comes from all this subatomic matter interacting, even though that's not a sufficient explanation. But let's assume you believe it is. And then you run into the problem that this form that you argue emerges stochastically somehow, this form now dictates the manifestation of another. And this is what you mean by doing something. What do? You bring something into reality. How do you bring it into reality? By taking a form in your head, literally, an idea that you yourself wouldn't say has any physical ontology. And you take this non-physical entity and you morph the minute properties of reality to represent that massive ontology. And the best example of this that we can show is literally what we currently have as AI. We have taken this idea, we've taken it and irreducibly put it into this constraint, and that is top down causation. Like if you write programming, you understand that you declare the function first and then you give it its properties. That's how that works. And what is declaring a function and then describing its properties? That is top-down causation. And when you have this and you have it all around you and you see it empirically every day, well, then what do you have? You have a delineation of two things. What delineates these two things? What could it be? It has to be the only rational explanation is God. God upholds this. And then you open up Genesis, and the first thing it says is God separated the heavens and the earth. It is an exact ontological mirror of what you just realized through the physical world, that there is this necessity that is inescapable. And it's quite a wild proposition as to how these people knew it. And then on top of that, how this book has historical grounding and how the tale of it is such absurd wisdom and some of it is so like otherworldly that it's difficult to understand the people that are described in it, especially Jesus Christ and his life. And you can say, oh, it's just, allegories over time, this, that, and the third. But let me tell you, it has withstood the test of time, and it moves a person's heart if you actually take the time to read it. And you see that around the world. And it's been, for the most part, a act of good. And it has enlightened humanity and elevated humanity. And you can say, oh, okay, there's some bad things that happen along the way. But what can I say to you? I mean, that's just life. That's life.
I would say that is a selective interpretation. I would even argue many atheists would say that is cherry picking, because yes, it's true. Jesus did say some good things, and there is poetry and very aesthetically pleasing poems within it that may have stories that could resonate with people if we take it metaphorically. Shouldn't want them to be literally true. You wouldn't want this God to be literally true.
And that's funny you would say that because I haven't presented him as literally true. And you have many times tried to paint the narrative as if I'm even trying to do such a thing.
Well,
No,
I'd
I'm
love
not trying to present him as literally true. I have
Okay.
told you many a times that there are clear works of man seen in the Bible, and nonetheless, there's still a tremendous amount of historical truth, depth, and the core tenet of the properties we understand
Sure.
declare about reality is embedded in it. And so to pretend that at any point in time I'm arguing for the literal God therein, no, but you have to understand that there is a frame of reference, and to be obtuse to this is to be silly. So let me put it like this to you. Your life, canonically, would be an honest account to represent it through the lens of someone who perceives the world empirically and has access to that. So if people in the future fail to understand your writings or your position through that lens, and they were just like, haha, look at this idiot talking about quantum mechanics. Like, what even is that, dude? Like, what the fuck? Like, if they don't understand your lens of framing, obviously they're going to think what you're saying is delusional. Yet simultaneously, you embed your frame of reference on these people without giving them any credence for theirs. They
But
were
this is
expressing these ideas, the same exact ideas you found your worldview in, but they were expressing them allegorically because that is the way in which ideas were translated at that time. They were not based in empirical science.
I
Empirical science is a modern day revelation. But the contents of the ideas, if actually you analyze the claims of empiricism and you simultaneously analyze the claims made biblically, you come to realize there is no meaningful delineation when it comes to the origin and the sustenance of reality. There's no real debate on that topic.
I would say there's a separation. I don't think they were trying to say what I say, as in, I think we know now more from modern day science about empirical things. I think what you can find from these books is closer to maybe a possible wisdom. I'm going to give out a big olive branch. It depends on the holy text. It depends on the prophet, and it depends on what the exact passage says. I would say that although you can find wisdom, I would also separate out, again, I'm not blaming the people who wrote it, because I think that Paul probably did believe what he was writing. He might have really did have a change of mind. It could be that the Jewish scribes who were writing the Torah really did believe these stories, or at least they saw good value in passing them along. What I am blaming, and I'll be honest with you, if you're saying you're not a literalist, I mean, that is fantastic to me, because I view the literal interpretations as truly what I'm trying to go after. If you're just saying this is part of my family history and I just like understanding the metaphorical nature in which our ancestors tried to get wisdom out of this, fantastic. Come on my side and let's go up against the fundamentalists who actually think the world is 6,000 to 10,000 years old.
Yeah, I just don't see a point in that kind of pursuit anyway, truth be told. I mean, at the end of the day, these people are a comical minority, and their minority standard is something that is an honest account and reflection of their intelligence. And I think it's a dubious proposition at a certain point in time. And frankly, more so a reflection of your own cognitive capacity. When I say this, that
No, it's the United States. The
let
United
me
States
let
is
me
filled with
let me
us,
finish this.
unfortunately.
Dare I
Sure.
say, wouldn't you think going into the jungle and then trying to educate apes about calculus would be a silly proposition? And at a certain point in time, you come to realize that if someone is deceived into believing such a proposition, and perhaps their deception in it lies more fundamentally at a root cause that you cannot alleviate. I mean, we don't try to educate away retarded, like we don't. At a certain point in time, we say, yes, this person is cognitively deficient and cannot understand the world. So I don't see this pursuit as something that yields any merit. And to clown on these people and try to like find them and yet in any way expose them is, you know, it's like picking on retarded kids. Like I get it, yeah, that's cool, right? It's fun. That's like Cartman. That's what Cartman's all about, and that's fine. That's cool. But like to disguise it in this like intellectual sort of like posh. It's nothing. It's not that. There's no intellectual posh in this. Like, who are you impressing by proving to somebody that like the Earth isn't 6,000? Nobody fucking thinks it is. Who is a
Oh my
rational
goodness.
human?
I wish that was true. Well, yes. I mean, yes, exactly. But I wish it weren't so. But 40% of the country of the United States does think that the Earth is 6,000 to 10,000 years old. And I get the United States is not everywhere, but we've been exporting. And so
Yeah.
our creationism is coming to a store near you. Unfortunately, I wish that weren't the case, but I wish we lived in a world where it was, you know, it was just rational thinking people. Again, I do believe there are rational reasons why they are believing irrational things. Many cultural, unfortunately, you know, culture has the both good and bad effects. You know, I am happy that you are getting enrichment through your life. And yet some people, lots of people, unfortunately, use religion as a tool to separate others, as a tool to discriminate. And my goodness, I think that we would be better off moving in the direction without it. So I guess to get back to being spicy.
Well, nah, I don't think we're going anywhere without it. And the reality of the situation is there's also, as I'm assuming you're someone who like believes in evolutionary biology, there's this really silly preconceived notion that a lot of people think the trajectory is upwards. And it's like, yeah, on a long enough time span, I agree with you. The vector of evolution seems to be moving upwards from simple cell organisms to here we are today. However, to argue that in the local disposition, this vector is pointing upwards, maybe not exactly the case. And what you come to find out is if there are the argument of genetic mutations that are the driving catalyst for epigenetics and the extended evolutionary synthesis of how all of this manifests and propagates through genes, through heritability, and all of these concepts, you come to realize that it's skewed to a negative bias, actually, meaning that the odds, probabilistically speaking, of any mutation that you may inherit from a chromosome assembly in virtue of pregnancy is somehow beneficial is silly. The beneficial rate is actually stupendously low because of things like gene regulatory networks. So it would be the case
But
that if
not zero.
populations continue to increase and people continue to proliferate, that the distribution of those who are actually less than intellectually competent would increase. And sure, yeah, maybe they'll start believing the Earth is 6,000 years old, but what difference does it make in the sense of like your identity in the world?
Oh gosh,
If
they
you
vote.
know the truth, then you wouldn't have to, in a way, I don't know.
Well, I will say you will get flack from lots of other theists just for making the statements that you just said. I appreciate some of the statements you just said. I appreciate because I compare it to flat eartherism. I will say, you said you live in Australia right now.
Australia?
Oh, you said the land down under.
No. That would be cool, though. I do not live in Australia.
Oh, okay. That would be cool. I would just say that I wish it wasn't a problem. I am a counter apologist, a counter Dawaist, an anti-theist, because I think that unfortunately the fundamentalist strain here is so popular that it has so many social repercussions that are dangerous. And so if it was just a bunch of spiritualists trying to win us over, it would be a lot more comfortable. I mean, I would not believe it because of, again, I don't believe top level in deism or any consciousness that goes past a physical form. But I'll give you an example. You were talking about chimps and calculus. I am very, because they oftentimes they say, you're related to a monkey and things like that. Monkeys, and then higher up, other apes are very smart. We can teach chimps and orangutans how to do sign language. They pass the mirror test. This will sound kind of crazy. I saw someone teach an octopus how to play the piano. And so, although
real fast, 5 minutes left. I saw the same video, but 5
Did you?
minutes left. And there is still 11 minutes left in the dollar per minute additional time. So if anybody wants to submit a super chat, you can add up to 11 more minutes. But
I want to add one more thing, and also keep on sending super chats, sending all the love to chat and everyone out there. Genetic mutations. It is true that many are harmful, but a decent amount are either benign, they don't do anything, or they are beneficial. And I always, in the long run of things, it doesn't have to be a high percentage. It just has to catch, and then that builds. And exponentially, if it is a useful, beneficial mutation, and I'm just making this up right now, but just say a species has a mutation where one or two of them have webbed hands and feet, and they tend to go into the aquatic environments more often, it could be that is eventually selected for, and it naturally gets selected into the population and becomes part of who they are.
Are you familiar with the 2017 Royal Academy thesis on the extended evolutionary thesis?
The extended phenotype, or
Extended evolutionary thesis.
no,
This
I'd have to
is
look at that extended evolutionary thesis.
right. This is the opinion of the Royal Academy of effectively the laureates and canonical argument of evolutionary synthesis based on the origin of species, which started with Darwin's idea, and even, dare I say, Gregor Mendel's pea plant thesis on alleles. And to not be aware of this, again, is to present a argument of a degree of certainty that yet again is undermined. Seemingly, this has occurred twice, where you hold the position that this universe has a certain age, and we can somehow empirically date this in some certain degree of assurance, but that isn't true. And there's empirical evidence that came out about this in 2025. And since the James Webb Telescope has been at the Lagrange point, it's been a steady stream of evidence that seems to quite strongly disagree with this sentiment. And the extended evolutionary synthesis is a proposition about the fact that there seems to be some guiding principle or something elusive in a sense that is guiding the vector of evolution, because evolution seems to actually have a vector. And the ability to explain this away, even in modeling, with the assumption there's just some stochastic probability, does not actually map to reality. And reality seems to say and very obviously point us that this is a vector. And this vector seems to take us from primordial eukaryotic cells, as we understand it, to what we are today. And that vector isn't something that is just RNG. It's not just like roll the dice an infinite amount of times. Because any model we attempt to do this with a principle of, we cannot. We can't even begin to slightly emulate the complexities
I
of
would
life.
say we know why we went from single cell to multicellular organisms, and that is because of the symbiotic relationship with mitochondria. And complexity is not a hallmark of design. We can get complex structures and system naturally. We get selection processes through millions, if not billions of years. I do want to read something because I want to double check. It says widely accepted scientific estimate for the age of the universe is approximately 13.8 billion years. And then it says at the all the way at the bottom, while 13.8 billion years scientific consensus, some recent studies suggest as one controversial paper published in 2023 have proposed alternative models that suggest the universe could be nearly twice as old, up to 26.7 billion
I'll
years.
let you exactly the paper you want to look for. It's MOMZ14. That is the name of the galaxy they discovered.
But how old did they say the universe is?
It's metrically dated to the CMB, as the CMB is argued to be the earliest remnant of
So
this.
how old is the universe? How old do you think it is with this paper?
At the current state of affairs, it is empirically impossible to determine the age of the universe.
That's what they said in the paper. It says it's empirically impossible.
No, that is the conclusion you derive if you actually understand the underpinnings of this.
Is that what the scientists empirically decided?
No, if your position on this, does it say it for me in the article? Does it say it for me in the abstract? I ask you and I urge you to perhaps analyze this a little bit deeper. Don't just look at it at such a surface level. And your publication,
but you're saying the scientists aren't looking at a scientist level.
Came out like literally in March of this year. If you want to find it, it is the beginning, and many other works they can point you to that state this. It's called MOMZ14. That is the galaxy identified. And if you simply search for that, you will quickly see the article I'm describing, which is Z-shifted to 14, which they radio with spectroscopy, date, and redshift, which is what we argue.
MOMZ14.
Well, this is There's a lot of emerging scientific work that seems to point to a deeper reality that we haven't empirically grasped yet. And again, to pretend that empiricism alone can ground reality is just not real. It's
But
perceptually
empiricism is a peer review process. It's that we are trying to figure out what reality is. It's not the claim that science grounds reality. It's that we are able to describe things about reality because of science. I mean, I appreciate wanting to see spiritual. I appreciate wanting to enjoy culture and heritage and history. It's just, I think we would be better off without the God concept. I still think we can find meaning and love and happiness and kindness and empathy and community and family and all the things that we're looking for. We just need some sort of alternative.
And Hizzle gifted some memberships, so there's 6 minutes left.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Hizzle. It was greatly appreciated. Ken Bush is now a not idiot. Marty Camejo is now not idiot. Resolute Geocide is now not an idiot. Marcus Antonio is now not an idiot. And Matt Mulkeen is now a not idiot. Welcome. All right, you guys got 5 minutes and 30 seconds.
I do think that, the truth is found. I think that science is one of the best ways that we have been able to understand the universe. I understand that, you may not be able to find family, friends, loved ones, your favorite ice cream through an empirical method that tends to be more subjective. I think some of the greatest things in the world are going to be subjective, arbitrary things that we prescribe meaning, we find meaning for. That doesn't mean there aren't objective things. I think that we've talked about some physical laws. I think that the universe would be around even without our brains. I think that the good reasons for why the Earth and the moon and our sun are here. And so it's just all of those things together, appreciating the universe and appreciating our family. I like being alive. This is the only life I know. And so I want to be nice and kind to others. I want to find judgment for the people who have done people wrong and the mercy for people who truly seek it in this life.
Yeah, that's good. Amen. Mashallah.
Well, we found agreement at the end, so. Taco, do you have any more super chats? I can always continue to go spicy, but I got a lot of the questions, at least I wanted out.
There's 3 minutes. If y'all want to keep talking, you can keep talking, or we can move into the conclusions.
Well, I'll spare you the conclusion, because, this is it. I don't want to repeat myself. We've kind of gone in
All right,
this
we'll move
circle.
into the conclusions then. So,
Yeah.
Chad, let me know when you're ready, and I'll start your 8-minute timer for your closing statement, and let me get this.
I don't want a closing statement. That's what I'm saying.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. So just say something then. All right, that works. Amy, let me know when you're ready, and I'll start your closing statement. I'm also going to put up the vote for tonight's master debater. So, Amy, you ready?
I do want to thank everyone for joining us. I do want to thank Taco. I do want to thank Chad and everyone out there in chat. Is it rational to believe in a God? I will say we are able to answer things within science. Evolution, while not anti-theistic, gives us a viable explanation for things, tells us, for example, how animals, along with all of life, is related. And we ask for the same logistics in return. We're often left empty-handed by theists. God spoke things into existence, which is not something that sounds rational. Sure, doesn't explain anything to us. Okay, how does that process work? When theists ask us physics questions, how did the planet form? How far back in time can we go? Not only can we explain how planets form through supernova explosions, we can go back 13.8 billion years to the Big Bang because of the cosmic microwave background radiation. In some of the more extreme cases, people think the world is 6,000 to 10,000 years old, which is a major difference. To quote Richard Dawkins, believing that the Earth is only 6,000 to 10,000 years old is believing that the distance from New York to San Francisco is only 28 feet. I'll ask again, does this sound rational? I don't think so. Even if rational people convince themselves otherwise, they have found some way to rationalize the claim. So is it rational to believe in God? Although many great thinkers have believed in a God, many great minds also thought the earth was the center of the universe or believed in alchemy. Rational people believe in irrational things for rational reasons all the time, and until I see some good hard empirical evidence for any of these deities, I have no reason to think that any of them exist. I do want to send one more extra love out there. Taco is a great moderator. I think I had a great conversation, a great debate with Chad, so I want to thank him for coming out and having this debate, and I'm sending love to all the people out there in the chatosphere. Please follow me at youtube.com/Amy Newman, along with my co-host James W. I'm sending love out to the universe and everyone out there.
Perfect. Thank you for the amazing closing statements, both of y'all. Now, there has been a development. So we've got 14 votes with 79% for Amy and 21 for chadSTATUS right now. So we missed one of the closing. We're about halfway point. So tonight's master debater is Amy Newman with 79% of the vote. So congratulations on your master debater title, Amy.